From our studios in the heart of New York City, it's The Hirsh Show. With special guest, executive producer of The Weakest Link, Aaron Solomon. I'm Kyle Serra, and now here's our host, Kyle Hirsh.
Well, it's been a while since we've been on the air. The Hirsh Show is back on the air, and we're very happy that you're here. Today's a little different. I've got my producer, Nick Morgeson, next to me.
Hi.
We host the Nick and Kyle Show when live every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We got a very special guest. He is right now one of the executive producers for The Weakest Link, the current revival of The Weakest Link starring Jane Lynch on NBC. Please welcome Aaron Solomon.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, it was a pleasure to have you here. So actually, I was tipped by a good friend of both of ours, Randy West, that you would be a great guest to talk to. So got to thank Mr. West for that. Thank you, Randy. You'll be on another show
love
soon.
Randy.
So we were talking about this before the show. Congratulations, season 2 of The Weakest Link.
Thank you.
The big reveal. So what can we expect? Is there anything different coming for season 2?
We are actually in the process of doing some run-throughs over Zoom right now to kick around a few format twists. I'm not at liberty to say what they are, and there's no guarantee that, in fact, any of them will go into play. But one thing that I can say is we are expanding the types of visual questions that players may end up seeing. So we've broadened that out. We think we have some fun ways to kind of ask those questions. But yeah, we're just kind of looking at the format and seeing if there's any way that we can kind of introduce a wrinkle that kind of, after we're a couple rounds into the game, like now it shifts slightly and just adds a little more intrigue. So we're seeing if there's a way to do that. But the good thing is, it's a tried and true format. So even if we can improve upon it, we still feel like we're in pretty good shape with what's already there.
Yeah, and you can't get anything past Jane Lynch. She is a rock.
She's awesome, yeah.
Now, obviously, because of this show, Nick and I cannot become contestants, but what makes a great contestant for The Weakest Link?
A great contestant can be one of several things. A great contestant can be obviously someone who's phenomenally knowledgeable and great at trivia and is going to rival for, to actually win it all. But equally valuable to us is someone who is hysterically in over their head and gives ridiculous answers that then give fodder for Jane to kind of lay into them and say, how could you think the answer was this? And, because that's a big part of the game. And honestly, and a third piece of it is, and we sort of unintentionally walked into this, is that one of our early episodes, we had a contestant, her name was Ariel, and she ended up making it to the finals. And along the way, she really had this very catty kind of a demeanor, and she was saying these sort of cutting things to her opponents and stuff. And so really what was happening was, unbeknownst to us, she was establishing herself as the villain. And we had this extremely likable competitor whose name was A. Noel. So we had A. Noel and Ariel. They made it to the finals, and it was really a great episode because you could tell that probably 95% of the country was rooting for A. Noel because she was just so likable, and the other girl was just taking barbs at anybody she could. But the truth is, that's what makes a good, reality show, is you want to have that interpersonal conflict, and you want to have someone you root for, and sometimes someone you might root against.
Oh, yeah. And going back to, those ridiculous answers, I've seen quite a bit of those on this series. So it definitely makes for good talking points, great discussion points. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we are now expecting another season of the show. So Nick, what have you got to chime in on this?
So Aaron, you brought up great fodder for Jane Lynch from certain content from contestants. Would you say that the mannerisms are kind of the same between Jane Lynch and Ann Robinson? Because I enjoyed in the old iteration Ann Robinson reacting to dumb answers or having the mannerisms at the end of the round. You won this amount in your bank compared to such and such that you could have won. I kind of see the same mannerisms. Do you see that?
Well, she definitely watched the show, and she was a fan of the show even before we met with her about this. She was always a show that was on her radar as being, wow, what a cool kind of vehicle to really shine, because the host kind of has a greater role on this than on most game shows, where you're just sort of the facilitator of questions. Not to diminish the role of a host, but this is really a star-making kind of role for anybody. And she, of course, being a star already, it was just a natural fit with her Sue Sylvester character. But what we encountered was, we developed the show early in 2020, and this is before the pandemic happened. And so we were having meetings and stuff. And then all of a sudden, when that took place and suddenly everybody was losing their jobs and there was this sense of, fear of like, is life ever going to go back to normal? We started questioning like, wow, like, is this the right time to do a show that's like purely mean-spirited and just cutting? And like, do people need that? Is that like kicking people when they're down? And so we kind of ended up in a philosophical conversation with Jane and trying to feel it out. And where we sort of landed was, Jane, Anne in the original version would always end the show with sort of like a wink, just to be like, that was her way of saying, just kidding, I don't really mean it. With Jane, we wanted to really kind of in her mannerisms establish early on that it was all in fun. Like we didn't want her to take quite the same school marm sort of tone. And that I said, think of it this way. Rather than saying, when somebody gets voted off, your final line to them is like a nail in their coffin. Like rather than thinking of it as that, thinking of it, this is the badge that they're going to wear for the rest of their life. This is like, Jane Lynch told me this, and so it should be fun and playful, but never really like mean-spirited. And we don't want people leaving the set feeling worse than they did, coming in.
Right, because I definitely noticed that in the newer run of the show, she definitely has a bit more of a relaxed attitude towards sending people home, unlike Anne, who was completely ruthless. And speaking of the original run on NBC, I think according to your IMDb, you were working for that show, right?
For a hot minute, I was. Yeah, I was. It just so happened around that time I was working on the Family Feud Louis Anderson version when he was hosting.
One of my favorite runs.
Yeah, it was. In fact, this was the run that started what is now the Steve Harvey run. Of course, Steve really, vaulted it into the stratosphere. But I did the first 3 seasons of that, and we were shooting, I think, season 2 and 3 at the old NBC studios in Burbank. And literally right down the hall was the Weakest Link offices. So when we went on hiatus on Feud, Weakest Link happened to be starting up right then, and it was great. So I joined on, and I was there for a few months, and I think I wrote on, I don't know, 5. I might have only been there for like 5 or 6 weeks or something. And then Family Feud came back. So I bounced back to Feud since they really had kind of given me my break in the business. So I got a chance to work for a minute on Weakest Link, and I was there for some early run throughs and got to sort of absorb, what is the process when we're stopping down between rounds to kind of figure out, okay, who's the strongest link, who's weakest, who are we going to talk to, what sort of drama are we going to build in this round, what conflicts are we going to try to create. So that was really useful information for myself and for Stuart Krasnow, our showrunner. Some 20 years later, we're now, trying to recall, like, how did we do that? And so it's just good to have that in the back recesses of our mind.
So you were talking about COVID protocols with us beforehand. Every game show, every TV show is trying to figure out the $1 million question, how we're going to get back in the studio, what the protocols are going to be. So what are the protocols you're trying to figure out, Aaron, with the Weakest Link?
Well, we were fortunate, but that by the time we went into studio, there were a couple other game shows that had already gone in. I think the first major game show was Card Sharks. And everyone in the game show industry, we tend to know at least a couple people on every show. So we're checking in and being like, how's it going over there? Were there any issues? What should we be watchful for? And so they kind of were the test balloon. And I guess they had, at one point, there was a scare on their show where somebody came back like inconclusive that morning. And so they had to do a huge quarantine. Turned out to be nothing, but it was a good informative thing for us about like, oh, what if somebody who is normally, in Jane's ear test positive? And obviously we don't want to expose the host. So we just really had to think about all the parameters. By the time we got into shoot, which was, I think it was late July, early August, it was late August, early September. There was a playbook pretty well set up. There was an industry-wide standard. And so what there was a different frequency of mandatory COVID tests that, depending on what role you had on the show, that dictated how frequently you needed to be tested. So if you were just like, not just, but if you were someone who, let's say, you built the set and then that's it, and you don't have to be on set for the actual taping, you would maybe get tested once a week or whatever, just to sort of be covered. But for people like myself and Stuart, who were in contact with like the host every day and contestants, still 6 feet apart, but nevertheless close, we had to get tested every other day. And then every morning, just as I'm sure you have been to like any restaurant where they do your temperature check on your forehead, and you have to tell them, do you feel any symptoms and all that. We had to go through all that. And then of course there were, masks obviously were mandatory, and then there were hand washing stations and sanitizer everywhere. So it was interesting because it was all still fairly new to all of us about how do we handle a pandemic, much less shoot a TV show first season. But we got it done, and to our credit of our production staff, they were all over it, and it really was very thoroughly handled.
I just have one quick follow-up on that. We've seen on a lot of the shows, the camera angles show that the people are actually a lot closer to each other. Like I've seen it on Kelly and Ryan. They actually look a lot closer than they do from the side angle. Mm-hmm. What is the actual distance? Are you actually doing 6 feet? Are you doing more than 6 feet? What are you doing with the contestants in that situation?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a real conversation that we had. And we sort of realized, without intending to, because this was in development before COVID, that Weakest Link is kind of, the staging of it is almost like built for social distancing, because it's unlike most game shows where there are two people side by side, or like a Hollywood Squares where the host is kind of in the middle. Everybody was naturally spread out to create this sort of aura of like, you're on your own island, good luck to you. But the original distance between podiums was 4.5 feet. And so we looked at it and we said, why don't we make it 6 feet? So that way we can just, not only for safety, but it's not that much bigger. And it also creates even more of a sense of like, boy, these people are, just apart from each other, and they're kind of planning their own game. And then when they're locking in, it makes it harder to see what everyone else is locking in because they're a little farther away. The distance from each individual contestant to Jane, I believe, is 16 feet. So yeah, once we were able to separate in that sort of arc and make sure everybody was a minimum of 6 from each other, the distance to the host was not an issue, because that was already significant.
Oh yeah. So, and if you're a fan of the show, people out there, you notice that the stage almost kind of looks like a wheel in a way, kind of like a big circle. So I'm pretty sure, that wasn't that big of a challenge. All you just had to do is, did you have to like make the set bigger? Did you have to adjust any sort of set pieces? Well, obviously you can't have an audience, so the screens behind them definitely made the touch.
Yeah, well, it was a challenge. I think we were kind of right at the limit in terms of where, the challenge is always where to put cameras, because cameras need to at times zoom in and get close-up reactions, but then you also have that amazing pullback that the crane does that, captures it, sort of a signature shot.
Right.
And I think it was a lot of conversations with our director, Ashley Gorman, and our set designer, Zaya Moore, who just figured out that, it's just because you're separating, now we're getting mathematical, but just because you're separating people by 6 feet doesn't mean it's like a linear thing. It doesn't mean like 48 feet across, because it's arcing. So it actually does curve in a little bit. So we figured out, like, once the curvature was in place, like that is the outer limit of our wide shot in terms of, we obviously have to include the podium 1 and podium 8 person on any group shot. So it was close. I remember they had to change it because it was obviously a wider circumference than the previous show. But we did that. I'll tell you though, the bigger challenge for us was one that I sort of take the blame for setting in motion, which was I always thought it would be nice to see when someone gets eliminated, where do they go? And the old version of the show, you only really saw 180 degrees of the set, and they would leave and they'd cross and they'd sort of go toward camera. And the next time you see them, they're in this sort of like post-mortem, debrief about, I shouldn't have been voted off. But I thought, gosh, like we have an opportunity to like really mythologize their exit. Like, where do they go? And so that's where the idea of this tunnel came in that we created. And once we said, oh, we could do a tunnel, we realized, well, that means that we now need to shoot the backside of the set. So the whole set needs to be basically 360 with camera blinds. And that became our biggest logistical challenge, is how to do camera coverage there. And, again, we have this massive techno crane that I think has like a 50-foot arm to it, like the biggest one that's commercially available. So we had to find a way, where are we going to put that? Because when you shoot the reverse shot of that, you don't want this big ugly thing to be in the shot. So it was a real challenge that Ashley and Zaya worked beautifully to figure out.
Yeah, it looked completely seamless. And, you know, I figured that the tunnel was a nice little, honestly, it was an ode to Star Trek in a way. So
you know what it was? I'll tell you, it actually, there was a very specific inspiration for it, which is, I don't know, where are you guys based?
we're based in New York City.
In New York City. Okay. So I guess you probably, Disney World is more of a reference for you.
Yes.
I shouldn't even be saying a Disney reference from NBC, but
That's
just being
okay.
honest, have you guys ever been on Space Mountain, the ride?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. You know, in the beginning of it, when you go up this tunnel and it's sort of like you're launching there, I found video of that online, and that's what we sent to our set designers, and we're like, imagine this. And so that's where we sort of ended up with, I can't think of the name of the lighting devices that we have that line the different rings to it. I know I hear it like once a week, and of course it's out of my head, but yeah, that was the initial inspiration, was like, you're sort of going down this like super cool, like futuristic tunnel, but then at the back of the tunnel is this sort of screen that allows, it's almost like you're going into nothingness. And early versions of our creative were like, we wanted to have almost like flames, like it's like hell, like you're going to, and like Jane's coming out of hell to make everyone's life hell. And when you lose, you go to hell, you know, and they thought that's a little extreme, you know? So we kind of figured out more of a nebulous void, kind of a Stranger Things upside down kind of world that she comes from, and eliminated players ultimately go to.
You hear that, kids? Imagination is the best thing about creating things. You never know what could come out of it.
That's right.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I want to go back to what you said about the reality TV angle, because I thought that was quite interesting. Like you said, you're trying to get the contestants who lost, you're getting them off the set.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at other shows which do actual reality, like The Bachelor or Survivor. You're watching them off screen. Was that kind of a look into those shows doing the reality angle, or was that more of a trend that we're heading towards reality TV in that sense?
Yeah, well, this particular beat was one that existed in the original format. And back in 2001, I know that the original Weakest Link, the original NBC Weakest Link anyway, was pitched as Survivor, but in 1 hour. That was sort of the one-liner of it, is that you've got people forming alliances, teaming up on other people, or, you know, but ultimately backstabbing them, and then only one's going to win the whole thing. And all that takes place in an hour. You don't have to watch the whole season. So I know that they were looking carefully at other shows and how they sort of engendered that sort of conflict. But also, you know, it's not always conflict. Sometimes, like, I don't know how many episodes you saw, but we had one where the two, like, you would just never expect it, this like 6'5" African-American woman and this like 5 foot whatever pretty boy blonde kid, like hipstery guy or whatever, ended up having this total flirtation, and they were just like overtly talking about, oh yeah, I'm protecting you because that's my girl, and she's my boyfriend. And they were like saying, you know, everything short of like, we're going to hook up after the show. So, you know, those kind of dynamics are great too. And if we, you know, we obviously can't predict, and we're, because it's a game show and it's really about the competition, we're not going to do anything to influence who befriends or who antagonizes who, because then that would be us manipulating. But what we can do is cast an assemblage of 8 people for each show that are different personality types. And we said, you know, boy, this one's like really outspoken, and so is this one. Let's just throw them on there and see what happens, you know. And then sometimes it works, and sometimes we get surprises. That's what makes reality.
Oh yeah, totally. So let's say it's a day taping. Well, what's a day in the life of Aaron like?
A lot of coffee. Sometimes 5-hour energy, depending how bad of a day it is. No, well, we actually, season 1, we had a really brutal schedule. We were shooting 3 episodes a day.
Okay.
And that's an hour, you know, 3-hour-long episodes. So each hour would take an average of about 3 hours to tape, because of all the stop downs and the calculations and figuring out, you know, the logistics and the vote offs, and not to mention, you know, oh, we didn't get the right camera shot, it bobbled, let's do it again. And then there's all the prep time and stuff that goes into each episode, running all the questions by Jane so that she's read them first and has, questions about pronunciation. Anyway, so our tape days were very long. They were probably, we got there at 7 a.m. and we would usually be done shortly after midnight.
Wow.
So thankfully this season, the network agreed that we would only do 2 a day at most, which is as many as the original NBC did. It's still a long day, but at least it's not like super exhausting and morale killing. We're also trying to keep in mind that Jane is having to power through all of these, and you can't have her losing her voice, and she's also doing Marvelous Miss Maisel and other movies and things, and we just we have to be respectful of her and not burn her out.
Oh yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, I thought I had a long day when I was on Wheel of Fortune, but because I got in at 7:30 in the morning, didn't leave until like 7:30 at night, because obviously I was the last show to go, so I had to stay there. But damn. Hey, you need some PAs? Nick and I can help.
Exactly. I wish we were. I was doing Pyramid in New York for a few years, and at the time, I think you and I didn't really connect until like shortly after that.
No, I think it was probably like right. Oh God, I can't even remember, but it was probably right after that run of Pyramid.
Right.
Because I went to a taping of Pyramid, and I met Strahan. I met Tom Kelly, great guy.
Yep. Both great guys.
And I believe at the time John Ricci was still working there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I'm looking at your bio sheet. You basically all the shows you worked on were game shows. I mean, I see you did Snoop Dogg's Joker's Wild. You did as you mentioned, $100,000 Pyramid. You even were co-executive producer of Confetti on Facebook.
Yep.
Yeah, Nick, Confetti was the Facebook equivalent to HQ Trivia.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
I won $2,500 on that show.
Did you?
Yeah. I actually, it was one of the first few games that they started, and I was actually at work and I was on my phone. It was the end of the night, so nobody was coming into to work, so I was just playing the game, and I ended up winning like $550. The first game I played.
Well, yeah, it was the best thing about that show was to be a contestant on that, because it had nowhere near the public awareness of HQ, because obviously HQ is a phenomenon.
Yeah. And
so especially in the early days of Confetti, Facebook was throwing like significant money into the prize pot, like because they could afford it, So, whereas HQ was playing for 2,500 or 5,000, that was split amongst all the winners, they were paying up to 25,000 or 50,000 in a single episode. So if you were one of the, 15 or 20,000 people that were playing and you were good at it, you had a real shot any night to not just win, but like win a significant amount that was really worth your while.
Oh yeah. And and I noticed that you've done a lot of kid stuff too. You've done a few episodes of Webheads. You've done Brain Surge. I tried to get on that show many times. Never did. Now I want to know something about this. Is there really like a difference in the quality of work when either working for like a big budget game show or something like Brain Surge, where you get like a scooter, a little television, and you get slime?
Right. Is it cheaper because it's cable? Yeah. I mean, no, and it's
sure,
fair.
We'll go with that.
I'll tell you though, generally speaking, network shows tend to have bigger budgets, and but they tend to want to put that on screen more so, because there's a primetime look and an expectation around it that cable shows, don't necessarily hold themselves to. That being said, there was this trend that basically after Millionaire was a hit and, redefined what a game show looks like, with the whole like lighting and the scoring, everything wall to wall with music. Suddenly everybody from, Game Show Network to syndicated shows wanted to do something that felt prime time network, even if they didn't have the budget to really do that. So some would do it to greater or lesser extents. It really comes down to how well budgeted each particular show is. Like Snoop Dogg's Joker's Wild, we actually had a really significantly big budget for that for TBS. which was great. So we got to do a whole lot of, everything became sort of a variety show. Like you would spin something and then there was a whole bit that would have with props and a talking bong or whatever it was. We were pretty much able to do a lot of that stuff. But there are other shows where they're just like, this is all we have. So come up with a very straight ahead thing, just write questions and put contestants out there. And that's all we can afford. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So-
Go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, is there a difference between working on a kid's show like Brain Surge and Joker's Wild? Like, do you have to switch the mindset when you're working on these type of shows? And what do you do? Because it's very easy to, when you're working all these shows, you kind of get lost in doing one specific genre.
Because the last thing you want to do is put a weed joke in a kid's show.
I would say that, the biggest thing is a lot less cursing in the contestant briefing in the morning. But that actually is something because, I don't know how it is for you guys, but I found that in my daily life, like sometimes I will insert curse words or choice language when I'm not even thinking about it. It just becomes such second nature. Yeah. And so there is we do have a conversation at the beginning of the season to say, okay, just so we know, there's going to be kids here. We always have to look like, we need to be in control, even if we know that the house is burning down or whatever. The kids need to feel like everything's fine. We never panic. We never, use foul language around them. And then in terms of the content itself, it's, we obviously want to figure out as best as we can what is of interest to kids, not just what do 40-year-old, men think a 20-year-old or not even a 20-year-old, it would be like a 9 to 12-year-old would be into. So there's a lot of people asking their kids, hey, is this cool? Is that cool? Testing out questions on them and stuff like that, just to kind of get a feel. And then also, is this prize cool? Because the last thing we want to do is give away a prize. Everyone's like, oh my God, that's so 2019, So it's an adjustment. Yeah.
It's like the original Run and Figure It Out. I remember there was a girl that won a snowboard, and I think also won a ski trip or something. And Summer's like, hey, do you like skiing? And no. Oh, there you're gonna learn.
That's right. Yeah. Nice recovery.
So it's a really tough. Kids, I think, are the toughest market out there. To produce a long running show. I mean, I consider Brain Surge a long running show. It had a few good years on the air.
Yeah. My first Emmy nomination too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So out of all the series that you've worked on, I mean, 1 versus 100, you did a Temptation, you did Identity, Show Me the Money. I'm looking at all these things. And was there a series that you particularly enjoyed the most?
Well, Pyramid was always a dream to work on. And I got to work on 2 versions of it, the Donny Osmond syndicated and then the big primetime version with Strahan. And so, that's as close to a perfect game, as I think is out there. And it's just one I grew up watching and playing and my family loves. And so that was really fun. But another show that I really enjoyed, and I call it the best show that nobody watched, although I'm guessing you might have seen it, just knowing, your background, was a show that came out on ABC about maybe 12 or 15 years ago called $1 Million Mind Game.
Yes. $1 Million Mind Game.
If you've ever seen it. And it was based on a Russian format that I think is still on the air. It had been on the air, I think 30 or 35 years at the time. And the conceit was you put together a team of 6 people and you all sit around a table and the table has a screen on it and basically a riddle will appear. And you have to discuss in the ensuing 60 seconds, discuss all the aspects of it. You're looking for clues. You're trying to figure out why did they phrase it exactly this way? And then the captain of the team has to deliver the final answer. And if you're correct, the team adds money. And if not, and then there's moments where once you start really getting up there, everybody votes if they want to keep going or if they want to stop. And all it takes is one person to say, keep going. And then the whole team has to go. So it was a great, really cool, high-minded show. It was the hardest show I've ever written questions for because of just how demanding the wordplay was and how specific they all were. But the story behind that show was it was greenlit by ABC with the idea that it would be a companion to Dancing with the Stars. And dancing was, everybody was in their cocktail, their finest wardrobe, ball gowns and whatever. So we would do that, and then coming out of that, it would be like essentially this Casino Royale looking set where everyone's in tuxes and the host was in a white dinner jacket, and it just felt like tonight's formal night, on ABC.
Yeah.
And between the time that we filmed and the time that we would have gone to air, the executive at ABC was let go, the one who championed it. And as often happens in our business, when a new person comes in, they just want to clean the slate because they're like, well, obviously the old person didn't work out. Let's just clear it all out. So it was sitting on a shelf. We had 6 episodes of it, and we thought it would never air just because that's just typical of what happens. But then the NBA lockout happened, and suddenly there were these 3-hour blocks on Sunday afternoon opposite NFL football that they needed to fill. And they were like, what do we have? What do we have? And so for that reason, you could flip from the Miami Dolphin New England Patriot game Sunday at 2:00 to watch 6 people in tuxedos answering the hardest questions imaginable. Not exactly a dream time slot for us, but we were glad that it at least saw the light of day because some of our, really hardcore game show fans enjoyed it for its short run.
Oh yeah. So before we go,
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
So in your role, whether it's writing questions or trying to figure out what you're going to do for the show, with all the political issues and all the cancel culture issues, does that come into, I guess, the thought process of some of the questions, or do you try to stay away from all that information, or do you guys try to put in questions for any of that of those topics?
So to NBC's credit, they have specifically given us a mandate, if you will, that they want to have the question material reflect inclusivity, which is to say, it doesn't just mean questions about African-American people or LGBTQ, but it means thinking about what the perspectives are of all the different viewers. What are they interested in? How do they see the world? What's culturally important to them? What foods are they eating? What shows are they watching? So that it's not, just getting outside the typical, it's very easy to assume that my worldview is the same as everyone else's. And the truth is it's obviously not. So we have put a great deal of emphasis on making sure that the questions throughout the round are not only different in terms of pure trivia difficulty, but they actually reflect different viewpoints. So that's a thing. As far as the actual subject matter, we try not to talk about controversial issues that will, take you out of the fun and the escapism of a game show, because, you've got CNN going or MSN, whatever your network is that you're watching all day long, and you're getting enough of that, drilled into your head, and people want to kind of escape. So we tend to focus on more uplifting, positive, proactive things rather than things that are going to remind people of conflict and, oh yeah, that's right, the world is so crazy and uncertain right now.
Yeah. Actually, I do want to follow up with this question. Governor Gavin Newsom is saying that I think sometime in the summer, they're going to allow the state to basically go to usual operations. So what is this going to entail for game shows? Are they going to allow audiences? And if they are they going to be required to mask up? Do you know what the protocol is going to be?
I don't yet. I've been reading the same updates as you have, though, that, which is that things are trending positively. That's obviously just great on a human level. But in terms of the game shows, as of right now, we're operating under the assumption that when we shoot in June, it'll be identical circumstances to last year, that we're going to err on the side of being as cautious as we possibly can. That said, we did build our set with the idea that it almost looks like a bit like a sports stadium, in the sense that if you've been to a baseball stadium and sort of like at the edge of every colonnade or loge is like this LED banner that goes around.
Yeah.
So in between those, as I think you touched on before, we have these giant monitors that are mainly used for throwing up prompters, copy for Jane, on shots that we don't see it, anytime we need a prompter. But otherwise it's just totally a black void. And the idea is that if and when we come back, we'll turn those into stadium seating. So it'll actually feel like you're in sort of the Thunderdome or whatever it is, this trivia dome. We just don't know. We just don't know at what point we can do that. It would be great, obviously, if we could. We'd love to have you come out and be our guest for a taping as soon as that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we go, I know that you and I have talked about this previously. You invented a board game.
I did.
It's called Also Known As. It's a very fun party game, and it basically it's like a reversal of pyramid password. You gotta guess what a certain subject is by figuring out their ulterior name.
We were discussing this actually, and I was getting tested beforehand just to see how this would go, because the last failed experiment we had doing a game show, I didn't do so great. So
yeah, I put him and another friend in a round of Jeopardy, and they did horrible.
Oh no.
So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put both of you on the spot right now. We're gonna play a round of Also Known As.
Okay.
So here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to set a timer for each of you. So I'm gonna start with you, Nick.
okay.
You're gonna have to name as many of these subjects in a minute. So,
Okay, let's make Nick look dumb. Okay, cool.
all right. So your 1 minute starts when I start reading.
Okay.
Your category is Russell Crowe movie. Your time starts now. Happy after eating a lady.
Pass. I don't know.
Okay, we'll pass. Queen of England. Hathaway knocking down pins.
I don't know any of his movies. This is going to be bad.
Oh boy. The next one. Actor rapper. Half of an Arnold Palmer.
Oh, Ice-T.
Yes. Snow White's dwarf, where Otis Redding sits.
Pass. I don't know.
Okay. Famous play. Passing of a door-to-door guy.
You're killing me, Kyle.
Wow. Oh, geez. Shampoo brand, Cranium and Scalpulas.
I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
This is bad.
Halle Berry movie, Saber Flounder.
You think I know Halle Berry movies? This is a problem.
Brand of juice, Fast Housekeeper.
Kyle, this is putting me on the
Oh
spot.
my god, all right, time's up. Time's
Okay.
up.
I got one.
You
Okay.
got one. Okay, the ones you passed on. Russell Crowe movie, Happy After Eating a Lady, that was Gladiator.
Oh, okay.
Queen of
That was a
England,
tough one.
yeah. Hathaway knocking down pins, that's Anne Boleyn.
Oh,
Boleyn, I think that's how you say your name.
And Boleyn, yeah.
Anne Boleyn, that's right. Snow White's dwarf, where Otis Redding sits, Doc.
oh, okay. That makes sense.
I'm
Got it.
surprised you didn't get this one. Famous play, Passing of a door-to-door guy, Death of a salesman.
Oh.
Shampoo brand, Cranium and Scalpulas, that is Head and Shoulders.
Oh, Head and Shoulders. Ah. Okay.
Halle Berry movie, Saber Flounder, with that Swordfish.
Yeah. Okay.
And brand of
I
juice.
actually
Fast
forgot what that was, and I wrote it.
brand of juice, Fast Housekeeper, that is Minute Maid.
Oh, Minute Maid. Oh.
So in this case, Aaron, what would Jane Lynch say
Oh
to
no.
someone like Nick?
Yeah, exactly. Who's also known as a loser?
You were the weakest link. Goodbye.
All right, now I'm gonna put you through the same test. I'm gonna
Sure.
get another minute on the clock, and your time will start when I start reading the clue. All right, your category is bottled water brand. Go. South Pacific country.
Fiji.
Yes. Meryl Streep movie, My Mother.
Mamma Mia.
Yes. Popular TV show, Contest of Toilets.
Game of Thrones.
Yes. In the medicine chest, rock group Help.
Pass it.
Okay. U.S. holiday, contractions from sunrise to sunset.
Labor Day.
Yes. Kanye West song, 1849 Minor.
Gold Digger.
Yes. Bradley Cooper movie, The Result of Excessive Drinking.
The Hangover.
Yes. Lady Gaga song, Terrible Courtship.
Bad Romance.
Yes.
Right?
Famous astronaut, genuflect, powerful bicep.
Pass.
Classic TV show, I'm enamored with. Time's up. All right,
Okay.
the ones you passed on in the medicine chest, Rock group Help, that's Band-Aid. Famous astronaut, genuflect powerful bicep, Neil Armstrong. And classic TV show, I couldn't get to it, I'm enamored with Linus's sister, I Love Lucy. So Nick, once again, you were beat.
I would have known more of that second round of questions, though. For sure.
I saw you nodding at like all those. I feel like if we flipped them, it might have been a different outcome.
Maybe.
So yeah, that's all. Also known as where can you buy this game?
Well, it's available on Amazon, so that's the easiest place to get it. You can also go to endlessgames.com, and then you can read up about it. They have a video that you can see how it's played and decide if it's right for you.
And I understand. I think we were talking about this. I think this was initially formatted as a TV show, right?
It was. Yeah, I actually, in fact, once upon a time, I pitched it to Harry Friedman, of course, of Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. Yeah. And yeah, I think at the time he was like, we're pretty set with these two shows. I don't think they're going anywhere. But yeah, just years later, this was actually the second game that I sold to Endless Games. The first was more of an adult-oriented party game that we probably don't want to go into on this podcast. But
we could. It's fine.
Okay. But after it came out, That Was Awkward was the name of the game.
Oh, okay, yes.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they basically, the Endless Games was like, well, what else do you have? And I said, well, let me look at all these other, I've got so many formats from over the years of things that just didn't quite go. And they said, I pitched this one. It was originally called Say What, was what it was called. And they said, we don't really like that name. What else could it be? And we were trying, we had another name for it. In Other Words was going to be the original title, but then it turns out there is a game called In Other Words out there that's played not quite the same. So it's just a matter of finding legal copyright clearance, and we settled on AKA, also known as.
Yeah. And I actually told you this, I was going to format it for a game show at my alma mater, but unfortunately COVID-19 hit and we couldn't do it. So yeah, that's that. But anyway, Aaron,
hopefully we'll be able to do things like that soon, right?
Hopefully, yeah. And if you need help, you've got us. We'll come out to LA and do it.
Excellent.
Aaron Solomon, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. And next week is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be speaking with the Mark Summers from the hit Nickelodeon show Double Dare, Food Network, and everything of the sort. Tune in next week. You're going to enjoy that. Along with Nick Morgeson, I'm Kyle Hirshon. So long.
Bye, everybody.